Following video is about Capcom's upcoming Resident Evil 3 remake. It will contain rumor, speculation and even fact. Michael works hard to bring you the latest, greatest Resident Evil coverage on YouTube. Please, if you have a free moment, consider subscribing. Thank you and enjoyed the video.
Hey there, hope you're having a fantastic day in your neck of the woods. My name is Michael Does Life, and today we are going to continue to talk about this upcoming all-new edition of Resident Evil 3 Remake. Strap your seatbelts on, it's going to be one hell of a ride, and here we go, folks. So let's start off with what we know in regards to a Resident Evil 3 Remake. Right now, as of this recording, Capcom has not officially announced a Resident Evil 3 Remake. Now, with that said, Capcom has said that, hey look, if there is enough fan feedback, we will take that idea of remaking Resident Evil 3 into consideration. That is straight from the horse's mouth. And again, considering how well Resident Evil 2, this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2 sold, there's no doubt in my mind that this is going to happen. So officially, that's where we're at right now as of this recording in regards to the Resident Evil 3 remake. But now comes the question, well, Michael, when are we going to see this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3? And again, we don't really have a concrete answer as of this recording, but we can sit here and we can speculate and surmise on when we can potentially see the Resident Evil 3 remake, this all-new edition of Resident Evil 3, hit the store shelves. I mean, for example, this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2 took Capcom about 4 years to develop after its initial announcement way back in 2015. Now, it shouldn't take nearly as long for Capcom to develop an all-new edition of Resident Evil 3 remake because, well, they already have the assets made. They got most of the work done with this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2. So with that said, it's safe to assume, since they have much more, they have a grip on really how to remake these games at this point, it's safe to assume that either 2020 or 2021 is a safe bet for this all-new edition of Resident Evil 3. But now we have to kind of wonder, like, well, what's really coming next from Capcom? Because Capcom has a lot of projects on the table right now, it seems like anyway. You know, there's definitely going to be a sequel to Resident Evil 7, that needs a sequel, right? Resident Evil 3 Remake is certainly already being hyped up to the moon and back. They're definitely going to probably put that one on the priority list. And then not only that, but Capcom seems to kind of be in the remake mode. Hell, at one point, Capcom even toyed around with the idea, I kid you not, they toyed around with the idea, whether they were joking or not, but they toyed around with the idea of actually remaking Shinji Mikami's Resident Evil remake, which is crazy, because out of all of the games that warrant a remake, that is definitely not one of them. So maybe if there is enough fan feedback, maybe they will potentially remake Dino Crisis. Now, Capcom's a huge company. I'm sure they have multiple teams on different projects, sure, but again, they do have to kind of prioritize what comes next. And at this point, who could really say for sure? Resident Evil 7 is older than obviously Resident Evil 2 Remake, so you would think that what would come next is Resident Evil 8, but I don't know. Maybe after the success of this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2, Capcom says, hey, wait a minute, we're going to put Resident Evil 8 on hold just for 1 second, and we're going to release this all-new edition of Resident Evil 3. That's really what Capcom could do. But really, regardless of whatever does come next, it's likely going to be, whatever it may be, whether it's Resident Evil, Dino Crisis, or some other remake from Capcom, whatever it may very well be, it's probably going to be a cross-gen title, meaning it will be on not only PlayStation 4, Xbox One, but also the next-gen hardware. And it's really a win-win, not only for Capcom, but for us gamers as well. Because, hey, look, if you are really clamoring for the Resident Evil 3 remake, and you don't want to necessarily upgrade to the PlayStation 5, for example, well, you're not going to have to. It's still going to be there for you on PlayStation 4. You're not going to have to make that jump to next-gen hardware. But if you do want to rush out and buy the latest and greatest tech, and you want to experience the definitive edition of this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3, well, you can do that as well, as it will likely be a cross-gen title. And that's exciting, because Resident Evil 3 is sort of a game that demands much more of a, not necessarily an open world aspect to the game, but definitely I think the levels need to be a tad bit bigger. And they will have more memory to play around with next-gen hardware. So there's just so much more that can be done. And I think ultimately, because that is something that is a possibility with next-gen hardware, they can do so much more. Resident Evil 3 Remake has the potential to be the best Resident Evil game of all time. It really does. But it's only if Capcom plays their cards right. I think Resident Evil 2, this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2, is sort of a foundation for what's to come. And they can take what they learned in this all-new edition of Resident Evil 2 and say, okay, that worked really well. Hell, let's improve that here in this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3. And then they can also look at what necessarily didn't tick and say, okay, let's go back and rethink this, for this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3. Again, it really does have potential to be the best Resident Evil game of all time. And by the looks of it, it might very well be the best-selling Resident Evil game of all time, beating Resident Evil 5. I mean, people are so freaking hyped for a Resident Evil 3 remake that it's not even funny at this point. You know what I mean? Which is kind of funny to me because Resident Evil 3 is that game that sort of just kind of got swept under the rug. People remember the game, sure, but it seems like more so remember the characters in the game as opposed to the game actually itself. They remember Jill Valentine, they remember Nemesis, but the game itself, it kind of seemed like it was just thrown under the bus, and that's unfortunate. I really loved, truly, Resident Evil 3. In fact, I prefer Resident Evil 3 over Resident Evil 2. I know, unpopular opinion, but to see Capcom eventually remake Resident Evil 3, that gets me excited inside. It really does. So there you have it. That's basically everything that we know right now. I gave you guys some facts. I gave you guys some speculation and rumor on really what's to come next from Capcom. And hopefully whatever does come next ends up being this all-new upcoming edition of Resident Evil 3. Thank you so kindly for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting that like button and stay tuned for more Resident Evil 3 remake coverage. See you guys soon.